And we'll start it from the beginning again. Okay. So we were talking about common controls, and really what you're trying to get from a common control is being able to inherit the control, so you don't have to redo it. We talked about that door lock. I don't need 6 different people to write about that door lock in their own lexicon and tell me how secure it is. No, I need it to be written up once, and I need it to be tested based on the volatility of that control. That's it. And then I should be able to inherit that. That's, it's like I said, you're not in a race to create the biggest documents, although I have myself created some of the biggest documents. I'm just joking. But that's, that a lot of times the SANA process or the ANA process really gets a bad name because people think it's a paperwork exercise. No, you got to do the paperwork. But the idea is really risk management and threat management. There's something called a hybrid control. We have lots of hybrid controls, right? So it means that one part is common, but one part is system specific. So an example would be for your system, everybody in here, it's common that you get PIV2 cards at NASA, right? And you authenticate to Active Directory or LDAP with those. However, you might have an application server where you require that application server to be authenticated a little bit differently. It's still meeting IA2 requirements. And you put the PIV in, and now in order to get the full access of that control, you have to install something like CA SiteMinder and do a web direct to the CA, the certificate authority. Well, it's not automatic. You have to actually implement that your control. And now you have to go through your specific roles and align them to what the Active Directory is saying permissions they should have on your application. So that's an example of a hybrid control. They serve as templates for further control refinement. Another one, they got general awareness training plus information system specific training. So you have your awareness training, but if you're on this system, you also have to be aware of these type of phishing scams or this type of problem for insider threat if you see someone do the following. We talked about this multiple times, but this is the official process here. So, and you'll see this. Where does this diagram come out of? Does anyone know? I heard 18. Could be an 18. I haven't checked it for a while. What's another one where you think this one comes out of? 53. Could be in 53. So you'll see this in 37 at a high level, and you could probably see it 50. They copy, cut, paste diagrams and use them multiple places, just like the one we saw yesterday with the REF, the risk executive function. You'll see that in multiple special pubs. But this really is meant to emphasize that the old baseline, assign and forget, is not the process that we use to select our security controls. I'm moderate, so I just have moderate baseline. Now you have a lot of additional, you might have technology-specific requirements. You might have risk-based requirements based on the enterprise risk assessment. You might have technology-specific requirements. You're going to have common controls. There's going to be also, that's another thing. Remember, and this is a problem I've seen multiple times where people want to inherit something, but they don't do the very specific things you need to inherit, like be in the facility where you can inherit the control. But they're like, that's not my problem. That's NASA's problem. Like, well, they say you have to be in the Kennedy Space Center data center at OFC 3240. So if you're not there, you don't get to inherit this. Well, I don't want to deal with that control. Well, then move your system over there. Or you have to, that's the other thing. If you don't or cannot inherit the control, you still are responsible for it. Yep, nope. And you have to do a system-specific one. Oh, sorry, guys. Online. Can you still hear me? Hopefully you can still hear me. Can everyone still hear me online? Just say yes. Okay, cool. Sorry about that. That was probably pretty loud. Dropping the mic. So The next thing we do is apply the scoping considerations. We talked about this yesterday. We were talking about Michael systems. So what are some examples of some scoping guidance that he's going to have to deal with his healthcare systems? HIPAA. So we have a tailored baseline based on laws and regulations. What are some other ones? Privacy. Yeah, obviously, very few health systems that don't actually use social security numbers and also are connected to very personal information. Also worth a lot of money on the dark web. The prices are up. So very high payoff target data also. And then we select compensating controls. What's a compensating control? So David said, if you have a control, you have a control, or it's not completely implemented, so you take another control and you based on the risk assessment, you compensate with that control. So exactly, if the control says one thing, but you can't really implement that control, you can implement a compensating control. However, if you're the assessor, you still have to count that as it's still finding. Because until the AO agrees that that compensating control meets the requirement, it's still on your POAM. Yes? Right. The non-applicable, yes. So that's why the authorizing official or their designee is supposed to authorize the SSP. So when you do the scoping, and that's the first part. But if you go through a test, right, and you put a compensating control in place, that's still a POAM until it's authorized, meaning it becomes, I don't know what NASA calls it, but most organizations call it a risk acceptance letter. So until that risk is accepted with that compensating control, that is an open POAM item. Yes, absolutely.
So, at that point, when the AO has approved the plan with all the mitigating controls and other tailoring, doesn't that become the standard on which the assessors would assess to?
If, for example, the assessors pretty much, the way it works, it's pretty black and white, meaning the control specifies what the control requirement must meet in accordance with both the NIST Special Publication Guidance 53 Alpha and then your organizational defined parameters. If it's outside of that, even if it's signed, it's a finding. But it can be an acceptance that's done on the POAM. Yes? Oh, sure, sorry. So the question was, if the AO has signed off on an SSP and already accepted a compensating control, would that then preclude the assessor or allow the assessor to say that meets the requirement? And my answer is, in my experience, no, because what happens is they're still to assess to that specifically organizational defined parameter. Because remember, what they're doing is they're documenting again. They're just making people aware. Sir, ma'am, you may or may not have known this, but when David filled out his SSP, he decided that he was going to, instead of using red locks, which are the requirement in NASA, he put a black lock on there. It's not that big a deal, but he put a black lock on there, and so it goes in the POAM. And then that when they go through the authorization process, that's where that risk acceptance is made. Many times, that's a separate process because it's a deviation from whatever the controls with the system are. So that's the way I've always seen it. If NASA so chooses, they can write their process to say, if the AO says it's good to go, but usually that's, I would push from that, because a lot of times, remember, that AO when they signed that SSP, they accepted some risk that's not documented. So when the new AO comes in, yeah, they're going to read through the SSP, but they might not know that that's a deviation from what the original intent of the control was. So I would say, well, if you do a POAM on it, and if it's accepted and it's closed out, it's still a permanent record with the system, so it still can be reviewed. Did everyone hear that on the phone? So then we assign security control parameter values. Where do we get our organization defined parameters from? Correct, from the NASA handbooks, yep. Then we'll supplement baseline security controls. Now, going back to what David was asking before on the compensating control side, one of the things we can do too is supplement, meaning that you'll go through and nobody told me that I had to have a red power button, but it makes logical sense. I'm the system owner. This is something I should do from a security perspective, so you can supplement those baselines and add additional controls. If you go through and do a risk assessment or it makes logical sense, you can do that. You can add, and you're supposed to add into the scope. Or you have legal requirements. You have PCI, you have HIPAA, you have some additional supplemental guidance that you're required to do. And then provide additional specification information for the implementation, meaning that, yes, so that's an organization-defined parameter, meaning that it depends on the organization. A lot of times, the risk acceptance is actually has the same date as the ATD, the authorization termination date. So if the acceptance, unless it's done outside the terms and conditions on the ATO letter, meaning that you must, that I've seen that in the terms and conditions. Yes, your authorization termination date is good for 3 years, but all of these risk acceptance will be reviewed every 6 months, and it's based on the AO's, how they look at the risk. All right, so we've been talking about this too, but there's something called volatile controls. Like I told you, in the past, in the old CNA, we'd come in once every year, once every 3 years, we test the controls, you get your ATO, and then we'd fire and forget, and then come back another year later. Well, that's not how security works. The threat, or the APTs, the advanced persistent threat, and the insiders, they don't just stop, do it once a year and then stop and come back, right? So we have volatile controls. And what this shows you is an example of, in a continuous monitoring plan and strategy, some of the volatile controls, whether they're volatile. So you see the ID. The ID is the family out of NIST Special Publication 853. And then it has the name of the family there. The total for low, moderate, and high. And you see the program management and then the different PII-specific controls. V means volatile, and NV means non-volatile. So a volatile control could be checked every 10 minutes, every 50 seconds. Your audit logs from your syslogs is pulled in real time. Or that door only needs to be checked in accordance with the facility maintenance program where they do it on an annual basis. Unless it has that special printer in it, and then at 6 months. It becomes a much more volatile control. But they expire like milk, and this is really what this slide is meant for you to understand, is that you should go through and select the controls that are volatile for your information systems. Overlays, we've been talking a lot about these, but they're actually a specification of security controls, control enhancements, supplemental guidance, and other supporting information employed during the tailoring process. They're designed to take advantage of the expanded set of security and privacy controls. When you go to NIST Special Publication 853, Rev 4, Rev 5, the baseline controls for low, moderate, and high, even if you add high, 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 or high, high, high if you have one high, but if you have high, you'll notice that about 50 to 70% of the controls are still non-selected. That doesn't mean that you may not have them put that they're relevant to your information system. It's just that you might not have the legal requirement or the overlay built right now. So it's important to understand that those are for specific legal requirements, for threats, and to when you're creating an overlay to focus on a technology stack or a mission stack or even a facility. So it says can be applied to mission, business functions. They have overlays, a financial overlay. They have space system overlays. The Air Force has a space system overlay. ICD has national security system overlays. They have DHA and VA have medical device overlays. So there's different overlays that are out there. There's ICS overlays. There's manufacturing system overlays. There's wireless system overlays. There's lots of different overlays. Different organizations create them. And how are they created? So basically, someone, usually a subject matter expert of the technology, but also an information security professional, goes through, and just like we talked about how the STIGs are created, the STIGs are created in a way that, first of all, you have a certain type of technology, right? And it's required to meet some guidelines, some standards, or some organizational defined parameters. So let's say that NASA comes up with the cyberspace security policy for manned and unmanned space systems. And it says that all ground station controllers will include AES crypto for P codes for all uplink and downlink signal. You're like, there's not a control for P codes for the crypto related to this. Okay, so now we're going to create an overlay because we have a requirement. NASA's come out and said those P codes will actually be encrypted. Okay, now I have to write a control, or there might be one, and I think there might be one in Rev 5 for that. But so I either take a control off the stack of 53, or I create my own, and I actually have to now identify there's the control of why I did it, the applicability. So detailed overlay control specifications. In order to do this, you will go to NASA Building 2360, the certificate authority there. You will go in and sign in. You must have a top secret clearance. You'll get a tape. We'll biometrically authenticate your RANDA code with that tape, and you'll run it, and you'll get that for your P code. That'll be created, and it'll be good for 30 days. And you'll have to go do that every 30 days. Additional information instructions. At any time your device or the person that pulled that crypto loses their clearance or their authorization, you must assign a new authorized person and go pull that crypto and re-authenticate that session. Tailoring considerations. There are certain instances where we can't, you may not be able to get those certificates updated, so you must go to the authorizing official and ask for a crypto authentication or a waiver from updating that certificate authority and using it for a period of time while providing your plan of action, a milestone of when you're going to be able to get that updated crypto. Oh, sorry, that's just what they use in telemetry signals. A lot of times it's for downlink, and we use it in the military, P codes for GPS and encrypting the telemetry from the bird to the ground station. So I'm sure a few of the people know P codes on there. We have to encrypt the telemetry. And so in order to do that, you have to get a certificate. And that certificate most likely will be a key that provides, it'll be a key for both the ground station and the primary station, and the human a lot of times that is pulling the key now. So definitions, overlay, summary. So there's a unique name for the overlay. We're going to create the NASA telemetry overlay. Version number and date. It is April 25th, 2017. Version of NIST 853 used to create, 53 Rev 5. Other documentation used to create the overlay, NASA Cyberspace Systems, author or authoring group, the NASA Cybersecurity, Telemetry, and Crypto Group. Type of organization approved and received, the effective date, events that trigger updates of the overlay. If for whatever reason the certificate authority changes and or the standard for crypto, for this type of crypto changes, you must come through and update the overlay. Defines intended use of overlay to help users select the most appropriate overlay, their mission, business functions. May example, environment where the IS is used, guarded building, traveling, information type process stored, transmitted, PII, PHI, we talked about that, function of the type of system. So we're talking about telemetry right now. Standalone ICS, the space system overlay. This is a telemetry overlay. Other characteristics that assist in describing the threats considered by the overlay. In an incident we had last year, an unknown, unnamed threat actor was able to connect to our space system and take it over and fed it the wrong coordinates for the solar panels and spun it, and it's still spinning to this day. That was bad. So now we want to make sure that from now on, all of that telemetry that we talk with those birds, it only comes from an identified person and asset on the ground. We no longer can just, put our signal up and hope for the best. What's that? Is that a scenario for real? There's a scenario out there. I don't know if it was within your birds or not, but there's a scenario that we took space cyber really serious recently, including supply chain. And so that's the other thing. It's very important for you to get these threat reports, even if they're the less version of the threat reports, because it kind of gives you an understanding of whatever mission areas you're in, some of the bad things that are happening out there to like organizations. So I made that one up, but it was a pretty cool one, wasn't it? I do have a story where this made the news, and I always think it's very interesting that there was a group that built a drone, and they said, we don't have to worry about authenticating the controller device to the drone's communication system. Your stupid security is causing us lag time between the control signal and the bird. Well, you saw what happened. And this bird landed in a bad place, and there wasn't even dust on it. And we claimed it wrecked, but it did not wreck. No, I'm just saying. But that's an example of where, so here's the other thing that happens sometimes is that the organizations that are brought in to do the investigations are not necessarily understand the technology. So they'll be like, well, yeah, it was a wreck. The system had a malfunction, electronic malfunction, and the train went off the tracks. We're not quite sure. That's it. That's the write-up. But nobody went in, and there's no witnesses because the person running the train is dead. But there's no one going in there and doing forensic analysis on the sensor and the switching system because they just don't have that capability. So that's an instance where recently, we call it a community of interest, where there's a lot more subject matter experts in space systems coming in now because we want to be able to do the full investigations on those type of systems. And I'm sure NASA will become a big part of that. Security controls, overlays, overview of supplemental guidance, and then the references. Not only is it required by, whatever law for congressional requirements for space systems, but it's also a NASA handbook for securing telemetry with crypto. I made that up too. Yes, Wanda. Give me both. Yeah, they're both. At least the way I understood it, I worked on some of the military systems where they would have both command and control. It's basically the signal that goes up and gives the bird, and it you had to have those P codes in order to lock on to the system and then pull the telemetry. Yeah, so it's usually also like I said, they will take those and use crypto, some type of crypto algorithm, to ensure the security for that, the integrity and security of that session. I shouldn't have used that example, but you guys are space people, so hey, telemetry, right? All right, let me see. Got them. Good. Oh.
So I understand when you say you need those references for things that you're adding to as an overlay.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk about the cipher.
Yep.
And you just got rid of all except for 2 or 3 controls. What is your reference going to be there?
So for that specific cipher lock and control system. Oh, sorry. So the question was, it makes sense at this point on how you're going to expand those controls, but what about when you're taking away, or you only have a very few number of controls that you're going to be dealing with, such as we have a lock in the back of the room. How would you work with that? Well, really, that's one of the powers of overlays. It's not just the addition of controls, but the subtraction. It doesn't mean that your general support system, this facility, doesn't have to meet all of those controls. However, we know that you can only, you might have dongles so that you can reset the PIN codes on those specific devices. There will be security around the dongles and the access to those dongles so that they're in a secure area and only certain people have access to them. The code, I don't know if that's a wireless or serial interface as far as downloading the codes, but there's a process around checking those codes on an ongoing basis. And there's also, for most cipher locks, there's a de-oilization process, because if you throw any type of powder on there, you can actually see people that don't change codes. You can see the cipher locks, the ones they've used many times. It's a very easy way of breaking in cipher locks. So there's a wiping process that goes around that. And those, so you can only deal with it from the technology stack that you have. It's not like you're going to go and validate the breadboard. However, there still might be things such as supply chain in there. You only are allowed to buy those locks from a U.S. manufacturing that met GSA requirements for cipher version, and there's requirements around the GSA requirements for what that is, that it meets those minimum requirements. So, like I said, it can be very small. I've seen an overlay be 10 lines for a standalone sensor subsystem that would plug into another system. And really what it was is it had the ability to plug in a sensor when there was movements in the facility. It had a temperature and humidity sensor on it, and it actually had to authenticate to the facility system to be part of the larger system. And so there was an asset authentication mechanism they used through SSH and SSL to that device. They would SSH in, set up an SSL certificate, and that certificate had to be valid. So there was things like that in a very small group of technology that you could do. But the one thing about overlays, and a lot of people want to try this, to say, well, Waylon, I just have this pointer, and I can't do all the tech. I don't deal with the personnel. Well, that's not true. The personnel security, everyone that works on a pointer, you still have to include the ones that are applicable, meaning that if this is a critical, now if it's not critical, maybe you don't have any personnel security requirements. It's COTS. You just buy it off the shelf. But if this pointer is the one that I'm going to use for the countdown that actually plugs into, launching a bird or something like that, it becomes a lot more important. I'm going to be very, very particular about who has access to it, what type of components are included on it, how deep in the supply chain I'm looking, and what mechanisms I have to ensure that only authorized users can use that system. So that's why it's so critical that not only is it a security engineer or a professional that's working to build the overlay, but it's someone that understands the technology. because a lot of times the ones that understand the technology also understand the vulnerabilities in it. And you're building an overlay for that mission set or that technology to mitigate those vulnerabilities, but also to reduce the surface area, if you will. So here's a detailed specification, justification for not selecting. If you don't select a control, I will admit that this is actually one of the more difficult things. Then you have to specify why you're not selecting it. So going back to your question, if I say I have no wireless, then you have to specify that the PZ033 cipher lock has only an RS-224 interface, a serial interface, 322 interface, or a USB interface, whatever that might be, and has no wireless and no onboard wireless ability to turn on. So you just have to be explicit of why you did not select that. So building an overlay is a lot of work because you still need to go through the suite of controls and say why that control or that control is not applicable. FISMA recommendations for compensating controls. That's the whole idea, is that you are getting to the point where, oh, sorry. So the question was, it wasn't a question, it was a statement. The statement was, if you had a system like a launch system with very specific mission capabilities and technologies, you could build an overlay to really deal with those specific security vulnerabilities, deficiencies, and issues. And that's right, that's what an overlay is. An overlay is meant to allow you to really provide the depth and the rigor and the type of controls you need for a mission space or a technology or a facility that may never have been there before. I got a great story. So I had this customer. They had this. They had a facility. They asked me to do a facility penetration test on them, and so we go to the facility, and a lot of these facilities need the facility pen test. And I recognized, of course, you can just literally walk up to the building, and usually when you're downstairs in the guard shack, they literally have the alarming and whether it's the alarming, the exit, all the guarding stations and the fire and alarm systems, they have the control unit right there. And luckily, the control units actually will give you the model right on top. So all I did is I went back, and it was not hacking by any means. It was very, very easy. They had for lack of better words, they had a wireless unit on their desk that allowed them to connect back and forth to the fire system to send its signals. I looked it up online. I just seen it on the desk, and when I was having the discussions with them, and I was talking to them. And so I went and looked these two devices up, and online, I pulled the manual, the catalog for both components. And guess what? Both components have default passwords in the guide. And this is no joke. Well, that wasn't the cool part. Not that I was able to just log into the alarming system and actually then jump into the system where they had all of the badging and they kept track of everyone who's coming in and out of facilities and stuff like that. That was the first thing. The cool thing I did is the breadboard versions that they were using, once I found out the alarm system, so for all of the management consoles, they listed them in the catalog. Then I went out to some of the websites that list the default passwords for these, and they all worked. I could SSH into each one of those. And so in front of the guy, the guard was sitting there, and I'm not joking you, he had a console behind him that was secure and had all the stuff, keep out, like blah, blah, blah. I pressed I did a command, and guess how I learned the commands too? No, I couldn't find them. I just pressed help, and the SSH terminal came up and told me how to do everything. It was not true hacking, but it was just like, help. And it's like, oh, here's all the commands you may run. So I was like, oh, thank you. And so I ran the open command, and you specify the interface, and then you could then do dash like unlock or whatever. I pressed it, and I unlocked and opened the door behind him, and it was where all the weapons were. And this thing, I did it from outside the facility, because the people that installed those systems they didn't want to lose the passwords. They didn't want to, and they were like, "We've had this for 12 years. No one's ever checked." I'm like, "Well, they didn't look at this part of your system. That's all. It's not it's not because it's been here for 12 years. They could have logged into it for 12 years." And I said, the other thing is that stupid wireless device that you have on your desk. Get rid of that. Just run a Cat5 cable, well, it's hard to get over to that box sometimes. I'm like, yeah, but it's really easy to get in it from out here. So that's an example of, when you're going through in these overlays, because nobody really paid attention to that part of the organization in the past. They were like trying to, hop the fences, or they were trying to trigger the alarms to see if they'd respond, stuff like that. But the technology stack was right in front of you, and they love to advertise. Just like back in the day, we used to look at the header information when we log into a device, and it tells you what it is, and then you go out and find out all the passwords and all the different vulnerabilities. You do the same thing with the ICS systems. Yes, David. So usually it's supposed to be the AO, but a lot of times it's the REF, the risk executive function, is who I've always seen approves overlays in coordination with the AO. The AO is the one that gets to really approve them, but a lot of times that's kind of what the REF is. So the risk executive function, many times in an organization, provides the enterprise risk assessments. So they provide all the risks that they see from an organizational perspective. They also, a lot of times, provide that subject matter expertise in their field. So in NASA, that might be research. That might be develop of simulators. That might be whatever, kind of the flight systems, those type of things. They're part of that group. And so many times, and really there's only a few organizations that have done overlays right now. And one of them is the intelligence community, right? Primarily because it's reactive. Like, some bad things happen. We have an insider threat one right now. I called it the anti-Snowden overlay, right? But it's an example of, something happens, and humans, we are reactive in nature. So that, and it makes sense. Just like I told you, when you build your overlays for your technology or mission stack, you want to go back in the past. What things bad happened? And even if you can't correlate it to a significant security event, because that's one you see the transportation stuff. So I tell the transportation people, I'm like, get over. I understand the inspectors go out and look at these trains, and they say, well, the track grade's off, because that's what they were taught to do. Oh, the brake thickness isn't correct. Well, that's what they're taught to do. But that's not the damn thing running the train. The train is run by a system. The switches themselves are on a computer. They're on a system. Well, it's a closed network. There's no such thing as a closed network. I've seen the most closed networks in the world get compromised. There's no such. So anyone that tells you they have an air gap network, as long as there's humans that get into it, unless you got the Terminator AI going in there and logging every so often, and just keep, then yeah, unless it's something that has no human interaction, then there's always a threat, because humans are the threat. They're the biggest threat. They're the opening into those holes. And there's other humans over there trying to trick them into becoming a threat, or paying them to be the threat, or using them as a threat. So there, like I said, there's no such thing as a complete secure air gap network. There's just not. So if you guys, has anyone take the insider threat course in here? What is the number one way what is the number one issue that you pay attention to on an insider when you know they're about to go from good to bad? Well, so that you're right. Time in and time out is a variance. That's a control we use. But one of the things, the main one is they're searching for a job. That's the most common one. right? They're mad. They're trying to get out of there, and they are the ones that can be flipped. Plus, that's what the outsiders are going to use. They're going to be like, Christy is pissed. She doesn't like her job. You're working over there at this vehicle company, and I'm trying to build the same thing. If you bring me this, I'm going to give you a top job. Or if you bring this to me, I'm going to give you this. So that's the number one indicator. That's when we do things on insider threat programs such as enhanced monitoring. Right now, I only collect certain syslogs. But Christy, she's pissed off at us. Oh, I'm collecting everything. Everywhere she goes, I'm watching every single thing she logs into. I'm doing so. That's enhanced monitoring. Insider. That's a very important part of this process too to be aware of. Is that that has become one of the largest surface areas, even more than phishing. People tell you phishing is the number one surface area. It is, because even I collect phishing emails. I'm like, that sounds really cool. No, I'm joking. But so it is a very powerful surface area. But the number one really is when you're in the technology area, or if you're working for the federal government, it is the insiders that do the most damage. It is not the script kiddies or the APTs that get some persistent connection to a DMZ. Although that's interesting, it's not necessarily how the most data is extracted.
So he and they keep telling me that an assessment of even the IoT that I told you that I know.
Mm-hmm.
Is someone actually doing it?
So the question is about they have arguments about the IoT side of things. So we've had IoT forever. It's just like people used to, all of a sudden someone came and say, hey, Waylon, that's cloud. I'm like, cloud? What do you mean? It's a damn hypervisor and some VMs. They're like, that's cloud. I'm like, okay, cloud. So the lexicon changed. IoT, all these facilities, these manufacturing and robot systems have always been Internet of Things, right? They're a routable ICS type device. But you're right, when in the house equipment, you can go out there, you log into the terminal, see what versions, and there's CVEs out there for what are the vulnerabilities are. There's also a default password file that's online. You can actually get it on scap. What is it called now? I think we called it downlink.io. So we collect all the password files, the default password files across all the different systems. Remember the old Cisco 2600 ones and stuff like that? So we have it in an SCAP format. You can download it for those CVEs, and it compares it.